Welcome to the Communication Diva Podcast, episode 106. This episode of the podcast focuses on personal disclosure and the question of what is and is not an appropriate level of personal disclosure in a work setting. I don't know what you think about this, but it seems to me that too many people are willing to share personal details that far exceed the boundaries of what I want to know. We even have an acronym that has entered public discourse, TMI, or Too Much Information, that flags this cultural trend. There's a lot more I could say on this subject, which I won't for two reasons. The first is that you're not listening to this podcast to hear what the intro voice thinks. You're listening to hear what the Communication Diva thinks. The second reason is that I have to wrap up this intro now because I really have to pee.
Hey, this is Jen, and you're listening to the Communication Diva Podcast, where we help you get the job, love your work, and advance your career through better communication at work, at home, and even within yourself. Well, I'm in a winter wonderland here with below 0 Celsius temperatures, which is unusual on the West Coast. I was actually out shoveling snow the other day. It was late in the day. It was kind of in the early evening, and it was kind of nice actually. And my fashion accessories this week seem to be hats, gloves, and scarves. So it's fun times out here in the Vancouver area of British Columbia, Canada. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for listening to this episode. Today I wanted to tackle the topic of self-disclosure, how much to share, when to share, and how much is too much. We've probably all had coworkers who overshare, and those who barely share anything, making them kind of hard to get to know. Some people seem to know how to balance what to share and what to keep private, and others don't seem to have any kind of a gauge at all for what is appropriate and what is too much. So let's start our topic today with a definition of what self-disclosure is. Well, in a nutshell, self-disclosure is the act of revealing or sharing information about yourself with another person. And that can be in person, that can be over the telephone, or that could be online. So things that you might include in your self-disclosure might be your history, where you're from, where you were born, where you grew up, that kind of thing. Feelings, thoughts, your morals, your values, goals that you have, failures that you've had, successes that you've had, your motives, your hopes, your dreams, things that you like, things that you dislike, your fears, and more. The benefits of sharing with people that you work with can be many. So people feel closer to those who share, at least those who share reasonably, slowly, and over time. Sharing your vulnerabilities and your innermost thoughts can build intimacy. This kind of sharing can build rapport, can create trust, can increase the feeling of safety and security that you would have working with the people that you work with in your workplace. Skillful self-disclosure can be useful if you want to build rapport in a group. You can use it when you're doing a presentation, when you're speaking in public. If you've watched any really good TED Talks, you'll know that often the person will begin with a story about themselves or a revelation about themselves. And that can cause people to instantly relate, and then you can move into the topic from there. Stand-up comedians do this as well. If you're in leadership, you might be using a little bit of skillful self-disclosure. If you're authentic and you're vulnerable as a leader or as a speaker, people will relate to you better. They'll be able to see that you're a regular person just like they are, and they'll trust you sooner. So self-disclosure that is skillful and that is done right can be useful. And so the key there was the word skillful. Yes, there are risks also with self-disclosure. It can backfire quite easily if you're not careful, which is why I thought I'd help you with this topic. Oversharing can be embarrassing for those who are listening. It can be uncomfortable. It can also disrupt the workday. It can shine a light on character flaws and personality traits that you might have. And some people are just self-absorbed and narcissistic and like to hear their own voices and hear their own stories over and over and over again. And we've all met those people. And those are the people that sometimes we want to get away from in the workplace because we don't have time for that. We're not interested in hearing that same story for the 14th time. Sometimes oversharing is a symptom of a lack of confidence or a lack of self-esteem or of this overwhelming need to belong or to find approval from others. This kind of sharing, the TMI or too much information kind, or the constant stream of sharing can really be a career killer. And if you think you're falling into that area, you might want to pay attention and monitor yourself. And pull it back so that you're not in the space of making other people feel uncomfortable. I worked with a woman once who wanted to tell me about her intimate relationships in great detail and who also wanted to talk about all the other staff when they weren't around and all the things that they had or hadn't done. It was weird because at first I was really surprised at how much she wanted to share. And then after a while, I became really wary of these bouts of sharing because it seemed like she talked about everyone to everyone in a gossiping kind of way. And then she sprinkled in her own intimate stuff without warning. And it got so that I thought, oh, here she comes again. And I would look busy on purpose and sometimes even had to cut her off and excuse myself by, being quote unquote in a hurry to get something done, just so that I didn't get stuck listening to her latest in-depth financial problems or her relationship struggles. Now, she wasn't someone I was close to. And because of this instant and too quick oversharing or self-disclosure, I actually didn't trust her. My trusting her dropped considerably because I thought, wow, if she's going to tell me all of this about herself, what does she expect me to tell her? And then when she started talking about my coworkers and the other people that I worked with when they weren't around, that made me really uncomfortable. So I was really wary about this person, and I'm not even sure that she was aware that she was doing this. So how not to be that person? How to be careful that you are sharing skillfully, practicing skillful, respectful self-disclosure. Where here are some things that I want to share with you to keep in mind. Self-disclosure, or the sharing that you do with your coworkers, needs to be mutual. Reciprocity is essential. If you decide to share and the other person doesn't reciprocate, then stop. They might not be comfortable with what you are sharing or with how much or how soon you are sharing. You also want to be sure that what you are sharing won't be used against you in a power situation. You don't want something that you thought you shared with this person in confidence to show up in your performance review or for someone else to hear about it and then come and ask you about it. This is where baby steps are important. Small shares to start with when you're first new and you don't know these people, and then slowly releasing information and testing the waters. If you're comfortable, if you ever get the feeling that you don't want to share with that person, then trust your gut. Trust that feeling because you probably have good reason to not want to share something that's deep and intimate and personal with someone. See if there is sharing coming from the other person. Again, trust happens over time and it is an exchange. It's never one-sided. So if the sharing, the self-disclosure is not mutual, then you probably don't want to go there. The next thing to keep in mind is that context is key. Where you are and what is going on when you choose to share something personal with a coworker is really, really important. Is what you're going to share work-related? Are you sharing after work over a beer or a beverage? Or are you sharing on a break? Or are you interrupting the workflow? Context and timing are important considerations when you decide to share. So here's an example. I remember a hospital housekeeping staff person bursting into tears at the news that one of the patients on our unit had died. Now, this person, the housekeeper, had spent probably as much time in the presence of the patients as the nurses had, because every day she went in to sweep and wash the floor in the patient room, and while she did that, she chatted with the patient. So honestly, instead of just zipping in to do something and zipping out again, she was in there probably for more consistent time, more minutes at a time than most of the rest of the care team. And so she had been in that room. She had gotten to know the patient. The patient had been there for several weeks. And the death of this person hit the housekeeper hard. And she was in the back room and she was mad at herself because she had lost it and she was crying. I decided then to share, to go over to her, to get her a tissue, and to tell her that most of us who worked there had had the exact same reaction when somebody we cared about died on the unit, and that she shouldn't feel bad about being human and about having a heart. I also told her that I used to cry, and it was with joy instead of grief, every time a new parent burst out of the delivery room when I worked on the delivery unit. And when the parent burst out of the delivery room to share with the waiting grandparents that this new baby had arrived. And that, I would get all weepy at that. And that got a little crazy when it was the 6th delivery of the evening. But honestly, I have leaky eyes, and things like extreme grief and extremely sad experiences and extreme joy touch me deeply. And that always tends to come out in liquid form out of my eyes. My kids know it well. If they are up on stage and perform and do something and they made mom cry, then they were successful, right? I cry at, really sentimental commercials too. So I'm just a softie. But that was the sharing that that's what I shared with this housekeeping person, and she laughed and she sniffled and she thanked me, and then we moved on. So that was appropriate self-disclosure in the moment, and I thought I was being helpful to her, and so that she would at least stop beating herself up and feeling bad, guilty, unprofessional, whatever, for feeling the way she did about the loss of that person. So context is really important. What are you divulging to someone else? Where are you when you do it? Are you in a private place? Are you in a public place? Is it work related? That's important to think about. The next thing to think about is motivation. Why are you sharing your personal information? If you're doing a big informational dump or a venting, or you're looking for a free therapy session, then that is utterly uncool. That is what you don't want to be doing. There are people you can pay who will sit there and listen to you do that kind of thing. Counselors, life coaches, therapists, trained professionals who are all very happy to listen to you and to help you work through some of the things that are upsetting you. TMI, too much information, will make other people in the workplace, your coworkers, feel uncomfortable, feel annoyed, and will cause people to suddenly get busy or leave whenever you show up. And you don't want that. So will turning every conversation into a conversation about you and about your life situation. So be mindful of that. What is your motivation for telling this story? And perhaps you'll think about that. The next thing is that balance is important. If you are too vague and closed off, people won't get to know you at all if you don't share anything, and therefore they won't get to trust you. I've probably told this story before in different episodes, or I'm not sure, but I know I've told this story a number of times, so forgive me if you've heard it. But I worked with a physician who was a lovely man, only most of the staff never knew it. He was an excellent doctor, but he had no idea whatsoever how to communicate with people around him. He was fine with the patients. He was very to the point and very precise. But with the staff in the hospital unit that I worked in, He would whip in. He never asked about how they were or how their shift had been or how their shift was going or how was their weekend. There was no small talk ever. He began with clinical questions, and he had everybody hopping because they were worried and concerned that they hadn't answered or wouldn't be able to answer his question correctly. He was well respected in his clinical work, but as a person, nobody liked him very much. And it was because no one ever socialized or talked to him about anything other than work, because neither did he. There was no asking about what any of the staff did, or he'd ask them what they thought about the patient, but it was all business, business, business. And there was no rapport. There probably was with other physicians in different settings, but in the unit that we worked in, I never noticed any rapport going on. One day I decided to experiment, and I took the risk of asking him a question. He was writing in a chart, sitting at the desk, and I turned to him and I said, "Have you got kids?" And he looked completely surprised, and the next thing you know, he had this huge smile on his face. And he told me about his 2 very young children. And suddenly he was human to me, and I had learned something new about this man because I had taken the risk to ask. Well, by the end of my time working in that department, he and I were exchanging recipes. because the ice had been broken and we were having some conversation, and people would say, "Do you like that guy?" I said, "Yeah, he's a great guy." But people would sort of roll their eyes or raise their eyebrows because they hadn't broken the ice and had that conversation. He was still very clinical with most people because they were afraid to bridge that gap and wade into the personal territory. But for me, it was worth it to get to know this person I was working with a little bit more, to learn about a side of him that most people didn't ever get to learn about. And again, it's about balance. I wasn't going to wade in and, tell him all my deepest, darkest problems. I just thought I would ask him a little bit about his life and tell him a little bit about my life once in a while when it was appropriate, when it wasn't super busy, and just to make that connection. So it's about balance. Share a little, but not so much that others are uncomfortable. One of the things you can do is think about a mirror. Mirror the others in their amount of sharing, unless they are the person who is making you uncomfortable. So if the person chooses to share a little bit with you, share a little bit back with them and match it. Mirror the amount that you are sharing. Because trust, again, takes time to develop. So a little sharing here and there over a good length of time, and you'll have colleagues who feel safe with each other and who trust each other, which is a really, really important thing when you're working in a fast-paced workplace environment or you have a big project you have to do. It's really good to be able to trust the people that you work with. And that is one way you can build trust. Another thing to keep in mind is that you need to mind the topics that you're sharing about. Some topics are just not okay to share in the workplace, especially if you are new or you don't know your coworkers very well. And even when you do know them very well, there are some topics that probably you don't want to share. Topics like the intricacies of your financial information, or your latest romantic or sexual exploit, or your dissolving relationship, your heartbreak, your divorce, your legal or your custody battles, or the intimate details of your bowel surgery, or where in your body you got your latest, tattoo or piercing. There are so many things that should not be shared in a workplace setting in most cases. Now, if you've worked with these people for years and years and have built up trust and gone through experiences and have relationships that have been open and that you've shared vulnerabilities with each other for years and they are truly your friends, then perhaps sharing some of these things outside of the workplace would be okay. But on the job and with people that you don't have deep relationships with, these are not wise topics to be sharing. You also don't want to share this kind of sensitive information and have it get into the wrong ears, because in some instances it could be used against you. So play it safe, both for the sake of others and for your own sake, and stick to less intimate and less detailed information. And again, monitor the volume of it. How much are you going to share? If the person isn't telling you much at all, then you might not want to go into a great big long story about something that happened to you on the weekend. And the other thing to think about is that self-disclosure online follows similar rules, similar things. Online, the difference is that people online tend to feel safer because they aren't face to face, and sometimes they're not even using their real names. And people feel that they can be free to divulge all sorts of information about themselves that they normally might not do in a live face-to-face situation. So be careful here. Even in closed Facebook groups, there are often a huge number of people. A lot of these Facebook groups have hundreds of people that have joined. And with the proverbial 6 degrees of separation, you actually have no control over who knows who and where that information that you might share will end up. It's dangerous, I think, to share too much of your personal information online, especially if you're discussing sensitive topics like your relationship with another person or your struggles with your child's behavior or such as that. There are people who know people, and next thing you know, you've said something that gets back to the person you were talking about, or worse. Social media posts, the other thing about them is that they don't go away. They are there, they can be copied, they can be forwarded, they can be saved, they can be recirculated later, screenshots can be taken of them. Talking in detail about your issues with your boss or about your relationship with your partner or even about your own medical issues can come back to bite you in the butt. So I would be really careful about that. This is a really fast way to lose respect and to reduce your likability among your peers. One of the things that I've noticed is that we construct our lives online. We edit ourselves. We post the best, most fun pictures so that it looks like our life is always a beautiful, amazing party, right? The worlds we create online are not always telling the whole truth. Whether we show them to be fun and pretty and fabulous, or we show them to be sad, horrible, and painful or dreary. Online, on the internet, is not a place to bare your soul with abandon, especially in a group setting, unless you are in that group for that particular purpose. If it's a closed support group with a therapist or something, I've just seen it happen too often that people have overshared on Facebook to the point of making other people uncomfortable, and that's had serious and long-lasting consequences for the people for whom that's gone badly. So be careful of online self-disclosure. It can be just as dangerous or worse as the workplace self-disclosure. So to recap, sharing can be a wonderful way to slowly build rapport, to build trust, and to build safety among colleagues in the workplace. Keeping it mutual is key. Keeping it in balance. Being mindful of timing and context. Checking your motivation. Why did you want to share this? Is it to make yourself look good? Is it to try and get brownie points? Because those are not great reasons to share. What is your motivation? Make sure it's ethical. Balance the amount you share wisely and be careful of what topics are appropriate and what topics just aren't. And be really careful on social media about sharing too much. I mean, you can share serious things. Of course you can. Lots of people do. But it's the personal, minute details that people maybe don't need to know. Those are the things that make people upset and uncomfortable. So just take care. All of these points will keep you on the right track for building healthy and successful workplace relationships, which is what I'm hoping to help you with. I hope you found this episode to be useful. I welcome your feedback over at communicationdiva.com, and I'm looking for topic ideas to do with the workplace. So if you have a great idea or something you'd like me to talk about, come on over to communicationdiva.com. You can leave feedback in the show notes for the episode, or you can leave me a voicemail using the little SpeakPipe app. It'll pop up in yellow on the right-hand side of the screen, and you can click on that and leave me a voicemail, and I will be notified, and I will be able to listen and to respond. If you did like this episode, I ask you to share it with someone who you think might benefit from it. We are available on all sorts of different podcast and radio platforms: Stitcher Radio, Google Play, iTunes, iHeartRadio. There are all sorts of places that you will hear us, and share on those platforms the episodes so that more people will come and take a listen. Until next time, this is Jen Swanson, and I'm saying share yourself, share who you are with others, but just share it with care. We'll talk soon.